Good afternoon, everyone.
Good
Hello, how are you?
afternoon.
So I think we have everyone, we got a small group today. So we have everyone we're expecting, I believe. So we will get started. I'll give a brief introduction. My name is Dave Wells. I'm currently a health and safety director with a temporary agency and have been for about 2 decades now. I've been teaching this course for maybe 14 years, around there. So one of the things that I find completely beneficial with the CPC program is it's by temporary employment agency professionals. So if you raise your hand today and say, you know what, I got this unique problem or this weird thing, it's by someone that truly understands our industry. A lot of times I'll go to health and safety things and it's just completely far out. It's not related to us at all. They're talking about things that just have no relevance to our industry or, just completely tangential to the things that we're concerned about in terms of health and safety. So because it is a smaller group, we do have a lot of information to get through today. It is a very dense topic. I'm not going to lie to you. We're going through legislation and laws and rules and so forth. But again, small group. So if you have a question, just ask. We don't mute anyone. So there is a little participation in terms of we have some case studies today, and it's just more important to kind of go through it and understand your thinking, and I'll kind of explain why we chose these case studies and what they represent for us. Any questions? Okay, I think this is your last one, so we can probably get through it pretty quickly. It is a little dense. I take a break halfway through, just a 5-minute break, just to get up, stretch, go to the washroom, what have you. I am gonna shut off my camera, just I find it distracting when presenting. And like I said, if you have any question, by all means, just ask. Okay, so again, this is your 5th course. I don't think we have to go through this part of it. The CPC certification. This is actually an older slide because I know they've added one more topic item to it. The mission statement, I don't think we have to go through that. You've probably gone through it a few times. Code of ethics, same thing. The objectives today, this is a health and safety course, and health and safety is something, as I mentioned earlier, I've been doing this for about 2 decades. I learn something new every week, especially if you're dealing in multi-provincial aspects. The laws change, legislation changes. You're reading case law on how things happen. The Workers' Compensation Board changes their policies and procedures. And so this is more of an introduction to health and safety. It definitely provides all the information you're going to need to write your CPC exam when you are prepared to challenge it. And it's just not a fully comprehensive course. It'd be impossible to do that in one day. Our objectives today, we're going to be looking at Occupational Health and Safety Act, including WHMIS, critical injuries, designated substances, and first aids. We're going to be looking at provincial compensation acts. And some of the topics we're going to discuss today, so we're going to look at safety principles and risk management, legislation, rights and responsibilities of managers, supervisors, and workers. We're going to be looking at hazards, the recognition and control of both. We're going to be looking at workplace inspections and accident investigations, developing and implementing effective workplace programs. And the idea after this course today is you're going to be able to find applicable health and safety legislation. You're going to know your health and safety responsibilities, both as an employee and as a company. You're going to be able to determine ways of meeting your occupational health and safety responsibilities. You're going to be able to identify hazards, take a look at them, and develop safe work practices. You're going to take leadership in developing and implementing an occupational health and safety program. And you're going to lastly be able to understand what due diligence means and the ability to exercise due diligence in the workplace. Part 1, we're going to take a look at the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And this act is a provincial act. It is the name of the Ontario Health and Safety Act. Every province has an Occupational Health and Safety Act. Some of them are tied in the general government. Some of them are more in tied directly to the workers' compensation board, such as Quebec is one where CNESST, the Occupational Health and the Workers' Compensation Board are tied together. But every province has very similar sort of legislation. Most of the things we will discuss today, it might be slightly different, but it'd be equally applicable in your province if you are outside of Ontario. And the idea is employees, managers, supervisors, workers in the government all have responsibilities when it comes to workplace safety and health. We're going to be looking at how the workers integrate into the system and what we as companies within the system can do, and to again promote the due diligence of it. We're going to start out with a case study, and we're going to look at an issue that happened in Saskatchewan in 2015. And so I'll read the case study, and if you can comment, whether it's through the chat or just to speak, and then we'll have a quick discussion afterwards. But in this particular case, we had an 18-year-old worker who had been working on the job for 6 or 7 hours. This worker fell at least 20 feet and broke his wrist and 2 vertebrae. He'd been working on roof trusses that were 20 to 25 feet off the ground. He had not received any training, and there was no fall protection equipment provided. The customer tried to blame the worker's fall on his untied boots. So let's take the perspective of we are a temporary employment agency. Take a moment and let me know 1 or 2 things that you would have done to prevent this event from happening. So what sort of things are wrong in this event?
And so we check for everyone being certified according to the job. And so for him not having the proper equipment, but also not having his training on fall protection. I mean, it's as an employer, it's our due diligence to make sure the work site has the proper equipment for the role that they're going into, but also having some training and tracking their training.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else?
I'm thinking maybe job description. Like, did the agency know what this employee was going to be doing?
Yeah, that's absolutely a great point.
It's happened to us. We didn't luckily have a severe case like this, but I happened to be at the client, and you're kind of going, okay, why is this employee doing that? So I guess having a proper job description and attached to his job offer or their job offer so that you know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. Okay, so some of the other things, just to move on, the idea of like the site inspection, that is an idea that's been promoted by ACSESS for a long time. And the idea is to actually physically go to the client work site, take a look at it, and make sure you understand what the role you are providing is going to be. So what are your staff going to be expected to do? What are the hazards associated with it? What are the steps, and taking a look at the work site itself. And that's been an idea promoted by ACSESS for a long time, especially if you were ever involved with the safety groups. It was a core component of it. And it just reflects on the due diligence of being able to adequately say, you know what, we want to work with this client. We feel they're safe based on X, Y, and Z when we've seen it. The other answer that came back was about the certification. So in every province across Canada and the territories, there is work at heights legislation. And in general, any work that's over 10 feet high will require that training of the staff, of the employees. The other idea was that the worker hadn't received no training, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit, why we want to do training, why we want to make sure that the clients are doing training, and who's responsible for that. And then no fall protection equipment was provided. Fall protection equipment coincides with the actual training and certification of the fall arrest and protection training. Did we take an accurate job description? So I think it was Kevin brought up that example. That's a great example. That's a great idea of it. Did we actually know what this person was doing? And the idea is, were they doing the work that they were supposed to do? So we may have, and I've experienced this firsthand, you supply a staff member, temporary employee to a company. and they're supposed to be pushing a broom at a construction site, and all of a sudden now they're on the tool. They're actually working. And you have to have generally a very stern conversation with your client that that's not what the person's being paid for. They may not be qualified to do so. All sorts of things do transpire when that does happen. It's not a good opportunity. It's not a good situation because, again, the person may not be qualified to do the work that, again, in this case, this person was clearly unqualified to do it. And lastly, the worker's age is really important here. We have what's called a young worker. So in most provinces, we have what's called like in Ontario, we have a young and new worker mandate. And the idea is anyone that's 18 to 25, or they are new to the workforce. So if they've immigrated from a different country, the idea is you want to spend a little bit more time training those people. They're not going to have the same knowledge. They're not going to have the same life skills. They may not have the sort of expertise that comes from working in a job. They may not be able to stand up for the rights as well. And so it's really tantamount for us to explain these rights to new and young workers as we go through. Take a look at OSHA and regulations. The occupational health and safety legislation in Canada outlines the general rights and responsibilities of the employer, the supervisor, and the worker. And we'll get into what each one of those means. And it contains information on WHMIS, critical injury, designated substances, industrial establishments, and first aid. How this applies to Canada, we are a country made up of 14 jurisdictions. We have 1 federal jurisdiction, 10 provincial, and 3 territorial, and each one of those has their own occupational health and safety legislation. Federal legislation is really important for us to understand in case you are supplying work to a federally regulated company. Federal legislation covers employees of the federal government, crown agencies, corporations across Canada. It covers any work. I always frame it this way in my own mind so I understand it. Generally, federally regulated industries work across provincial boundaries. So some examples are the federal government, airports, banks, ferries, tunnels, bridges, radio and television broadcasting, grain elevators, highway transport, so any sort of truck driving, pipeline, railways, shipping and shipping services, and telephone type systems. Approximately 10% of the workforce is under this legislation. And the reason it's very important for us as a third-party provider is if we are supplying workers to a federally regulated company, we have to ensure that the federally regulated occupational health and safety requirements are being maintained at that work site. If there is any sort of issue, if there's an inspection, it's going to be a federal inspector, not a provincial inspector. And while the rules are similar, they are different in terms of requirements and training and so forth. So that may be one when you're doing your sales process, when you're doing your lead generation or contract creation with a potential client, you may want to make sure if they fall within one of those industries, ask if they are federally regulated. It's a really important question to ask, again, because you will be required to meet those health and safety requirements. OSHA aims to do a couple things. They want to ensure that employees' health and safety and well-being in the workplace. They want to encourage employees' participation in maintaining and improving health and safety. They want to prevent risks to health and safety in the workplace, to involve employees through representation on committees, and to ensure expert advice and resources are available. And what our role is to participate in health and safety meetings and committees, onboard and trade contract and temporary employees under their OSHA regulations and legislation, maintain and improve existing training opportunities, ensure on-site health and safety inspections reviews are done on a regular basis. And essentially what this means is we do have a responsibility in the workplace, especially when it comes to our temporary employees. We're what's known as the employer of record. So generally any sort of workers' comp charges will be maintained by the temporary employment agency. If the worker gets hurt, we will bear the cost of it in general for any such injury. So we have a vested interest in health and safety to ensure that our employees, again, as the employer of record, is maintained. We have multiple choice. If you can just let me know what your answer is. You can do it in the chat. I complete a workplace safety site inspection with every new customer prior to sending an employee out on the work assignment. I do this A, all the time with no exceptions. B, about 90% of the time. C, usually around half the time I can get out to do customer site visits. Usually after they start working, I will book time to go on site. None of the time is my employee tells me whether it's safe or not. So if you can just record in the chat what your answer is. Is it A, B, C, D, or E? So we have resoundingly A as the answer. That's a great response. Site inspections, I kind of touched on earlier, they are one of the more important things we can do to protect ourselves as a temporary employment agency. It's really tough to send employees to a work site if you've never seen that work site yourself. Just because you can't necessarily go off what the customer themselves are saying about their workplace and how they follow safety rules. This is one of those opportunities where it's a good sales opportunity because you get to go on site and see your customer. But it's also, again, an act of due diligence to make sure that you're going on site, ensuring this place is safe, ensuring that any workers you send there are going to be safe. It's truly a good opportunity. That's a little harder. I can be honest, it's a little harder since COVID. A lot of customers are a little more hesitant to do these inspections. It was a lot easier before COVID. And obviously COVID is hopefully past us, but it's one of these resounding things where the customers are a little more loath to allow health and safety inspections. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing them, doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying, and again, maintaining our due diligence. So this question is, who's responsible for what? And we have 4 parties involved with our particular industry. We have the workers themselves, we have the supervisor, we have the staffing agency, and then we have the customer. So when we're talking about responsibility, I kind of discussed it a little bit when we were talking about employer of record. But when it comes to the health and safety of worker, everyone plays a key role in maintaining a safe work environment. And we do this through training, education, and awareness. So within the legislation itself, it actually defines each one of these parties, perhaps not by name, but it defines them as responsible for the health and safety of the employee. Our industry itself has a unique relationship because the health and safety of the employee is responsible by all 4 parties. And all 4 parties must come together in a mutually agreeable way to ensure the safety of the employee. We'll kind of get into what this means in a few slides here, but we're talking about me ensuring that necessary training is being done, mandatory training is being done, good practice training is being done, such as standard operating procedures. You want to make sure it's very clear who's doing what in terms of protecting worker safety. And one of the recommendations always, in our case, is to ensure that perhaps you're putting those sort of expectations in your commercial contracts. You may say something of the fact that, customer is responsible for X, Y, and Z training. Agency is responsible for, let's say, women's training. Whatever it may be that you decide your company is going to be responsible for. If it's in the contract and something does happen, then you have some legal evidence to say it was the responsibility of the customer to do that training. You don't want to get into a situation where you're both pointing fingers. I thought you were doing it. I thought you were doing it. No one wins in that case. The government's generally just going to be honest, they'll probably charge both of you with the infraction. Another multiple choice. If you can share it in the screen, in the chat button, sorry. Who advises workers of hazards in the workplace and their specific role and provides written instruction where prescribed? Is it the customer? Is it the worker? The staffing agency or the supervisor? So we got a couple, we got a customer, we got a staffing agency. And the answer isn't touched upon by our answers. The answer is the supervisor. And so actually both the answers, one of them said customer, one said the agency. So this one's a bit of a curveball. It's the supervisor. So who is the supervisor? And interesting enough, if you have little knowledge of our industry and health and safety, the answer is both. So the supervisor is at the workplace. So it's the, whatever the site supervisor, whatever your client calls them. And in general, there is a supervisory overview by the staffing agency themselves. You're providing instruction to the worker, you're providing discipline to the worker, you're providing training to the worker. So there is a duality of responsibility. It's borne on the supervisor. We'll get into what the responsibilities are. But generally they're held both by the client and the staffing agency themselves. So let's take a look at what the responsibilities of our customers are. They have to make sure that equipment, protective devices provided, maintained, and used as prescribed in the workplace. There has to be a copy of OSA posted in the workplace. Information, instruction, and supervision is provided to all workers. And that's a very specific word, workers. They don't say temporary agency workers. They don't say full-time workers. They don't say, summer staff. Workers generally defined as anyone on the workplace. Could even be contractors in a lot of cases, depending on the court case, like depending on the particulars of the actual work environment, but it generally includes everyone on the workplace. The customer must assign a competent person when selecting a supervisor. Again, they don't define that. They leave that up to the employer themselves to define and dictate what a competent person is. Customer must have in place a written, annually reviewed health and safety policy and program and have it posted and implemented in the workplace program. And the customer has to take every precaution reasonable in all circumstances for the protection of workers. Health and safety, that is a big sort of catch-all phrase. Many charges by the Ministry of Labor here in Ontario, they will pull that as the actual issue itself. So they won't typically define or tell you what you should have done. They will say you didn't take every precaution reasonable in all circumstances. So if a person fell, they're not going to say, you should have done this, you should have bought this equipment, you should have had this training, unless there's a clear dereliction of that duty. They will generally, a lot of times they will use this catch-all, every precaution reasonable. And you're going to see that a few times in our course today. What are the responsibilities of a Joint Health and Safety Committee? Joint Health and Safety Committee is a committee made up of at least one worker and one management employee. It depends on the size of the workplace. You could get away with it. Depends, it scales up. So the larger you are, the more people you're supposed to have. Each one of those people have to be trained. So everyone on the committee must be trained, or you at least have to have the minimum required number of trained people. And they look at a number of things. And we have 9 listed here today. They look at identifying and evaluate workplace hazards, participating in programs to protect health and safety, involved with employee complaints regarding health and safety. They review injury and work hazard records, monitor and follow up work reports and recommended action, participate in safety and health inquiries and investigation as appropriate, participate in resolving workplace refusals and work stoppages, make recommendations to management for incident prevention and safety program activities, and monitor effectiveness of safety programs. Joint Health and Safety Committee, it has far-reaching responsibilities, and the idea is to have both parties in the workplace. Generally, if it is unionized, the union will be intimately responsible and involved in Joint Health and Safety Committee as well. But the idea is to have both sides of the party, so to speak, participating in health and safety. What are the responsibilities of the workplace supervisor? So this is going to be very similar to the responsibilities of the client. They have to make sure that workers abide by the act, the regulations. They have to make sure that they wear any required PPE, equipment or clothing. They have to make sure that the workers are advised of any hazards in the workplace. And where required, provide written instruction. And lastly, the supervisor takes every precaution reasonable in the circumstance for the protection of the worker. So very similar to what we just discussed. This large catch-all sort of phrase, not very specific, but the government means to be to have it like a far-reaching net with that phrase. And lastly, what are the responsibilities of the agency? The agency, very similar, needs to provide training to all workers under OSHA and Provincial Compensation Acts. They got to ensure that PPE is worn, provided, so any work boots, eye protection are worn properly, they're maintained, and used as prescribed. They got to ensure that workers abide by the act and the regulation and wear the prescribed PPE, equipment, or clothing, and provide required training on any of the prescribed PPEs, and a copy of OSHA must be posted in the workplace. Very little difference here between supervisor, the on-site supervisor, and the client workplace responsibilities. So we need to understand it's not just we're not supplying just people to the clients. We do have, especially under workers' compensation, we have very specific duality of responsibilities for health and safety. And lastly, what are the rights of the workers? There's three basic rights: the right to know, the right to participate, and the right to refuse unsafe work. Alberta has a little bit different, we'll take a look at that later, but these rights are protected and maintained for all workers in the workplace. So it doesn't matter if you're temporary, it doesn't matter if you're contract, it doesn't matter if you work nights or days, these rights are shared by every employee. Both agency and the client have employer duties under the law to protect the health and safety. Taking a look at these individually, the right to know means that the employee, the worker, has the right to know about what hazards are present in the workplace. And they need to be given the information, training, and supervision to protect themselves. One of the easiest examples I give when we're training staff here at our company is the idea of working inside a food facility. So if the food facility works with, let's say, nuts, peanuts, you want to be telling each potential temporary employee that goes there that there is the presence of nuts, peanuts, or what have you. And the idea is you want to make sure that the hazards are known to the employee. You don't want the employee to get there and go into anaphylactic shock because they're exposed to peanuts, and we didn't provide them with the information that the work environment had peanuts. So when there are hazards in place, and it could be even more simple, it could be, working at heights, let's say, or working outside, so they're appropriately dressed, whether it's heat or cold. But that's a very important right of workers in the workplace. The right to participate means the right to participate in the Joint Health and Safety Committee, which we just discussed. And lastly, one of the most ill understood rights is the right to refuse. So every employee has the right to refuse unsafe work that they believe to be dangerous to themselves and or their coworkers. So it's not necessarily just me making a complaint. If the work environment is hazard enough where I may think another employee may be injured or maimed or hurt, the right to refuse work is shared at that point. Another multiple choice, please go ahead and put it in the chat function. When should you do a site-specific hazard safety assessment at a new customer site? Prior to the assignment, within the first 48 hours of the assignment starting, prior to the assignment starting, or if new hazards have been introduced to work site prior to the assignment starting, and repeated when conditions of the work site changes, C, or lastly, A, C, and D. Please go ahead and record your result. So I think universally we got F. Yeah, that's absolutely the best answer. So we kind of discussed doing a whatever your company may call them, risk analysis, site inspection, risk inspection. Every company has a different name for it potentially. But you generally want to do it before you supply any staff there. Second, if new hazards are being introduced to a work site. So are they adding a new machine? Are they adding a new process? Are your people being moved from the shipping department to the receiving department, let's say? And then lastly, when conditions at the work site changes. And so that's kind of those two examples are the same thing. New machines, new workplace, what have you. Maybe you only supplied workers to the front office and they were doing more clerical work. And now that you have an opening for a forklift driver. you may want to go, if you do want to go, take a look at that work site and just make sure, especially if you haven't seen it, is the back warehouse area, let's say, is much different than the front office where you were supplying labor before. Moving on to part 2, the WHMIS. 2015 is what it's officially called, but it's known as the Global Harmonized System. And we'll be going through a number of items here. This is what's known as a right to know legislation. It applies to hazardous products. And there's several pieces of legislation kind of in the same bucket that become what's known as WHMIS, the Workplace Hazard Materials and Information System. It's a comprehensive plan for providing information on hazardous materials intended for use in workplaces. It applies to all Canadian workplaces, which are covered by occupational health and safety legislation, and where WHMIS controlled products are used. So if your work environment or the work environment of your client does not have any WHMIS controlled products, you don't necessarily have to do training. I think the general industry practice, though, is to train, especially in terms of any sort of general labor type of work. At least from what I've seen, most companies do train WHMIS, at least the education portion of it. Maybe not the practical part of it, but they train, have some sort of training in-house, whether it's a video, whether it's a booklet, whether it's an instructional setting. Generally, our industry does do that. Compliance is critical, and therefore knowledge is essential for you, the workers, as well as the customers. Kind of briefly look at the history of WHMIS. WHMIS, it's old, but it's not that old. Basically in 1979, there was a call to look at the current legislation. Later on in 1979, if one of you have heard of this before, the Mississauga train derailment happened here in Mississauga. Mississauga was still fairly big back then, not quite as big as it is now. But essentially what happened is there was a train derailment, there was an explosion and a release of toxic gas in the environment that caused the evacuation of 200,000 people. In 1980, there was the introduction of the transportation of dangerous goods. A lot of times what happens when there's a major incident like this, so in 79 when the derailment happened, it really pushes health and safety. So everyone recognizes there was a defect. There was something wrong with what was going on in terms of like the recovery, in terms of notifying people, in terms of even knowing what was on the train. And it propelled the government to do something. It propelled the government, it propelled industry, and it propelled workers and unions. They call it the tripartite. They published a study or published a report in 1980, a WHMIS report of the Project Steering Committee. 1988, the execution of WHMIS on a national basis was had. So there was a system put in place, and then it was revamped in 2015. 2018 was the completion date, but it's called WHMIS 2015. And we'll kind of get into that in a second, what that means. The intent of the global harmonized system is truly to help facilitate trade by eliminating multiple classification systems and enhance protection of human health by using standard and constant messaging. In December 1st, 2018, all Canadian parties must participate with WHMIS 2015 legislation. A little bit different now. You fast forward to the current year, and we have tariffs and we have all sorts of global muckery going on. But that'll probably subside. I mean, the understanding is we're still very much a global system. And this one particular classification pre-2015, there's a substance. And in Canada, the US, Japan, and Korea, it was listed as toxic. Same substance, listed as harmful in the EU, Australia, Malaysia, Thailand. China, listed as moderately toxic. New Zealand said it was hazardous. And India said it was non-toxic. Again, we need to remember this is the exact same substance. So in a global economy, the substance is being shipped or produced in each one of these provinces, in each one of these countries, each one of these areas. And you can see where there could be some misdirection, some issues, some miscommunication when India says the same substance is non-toxic and Canada says it is toxic. So the idea was to have a global harmonized system where we can say this substance is whatever it may be, whether it's toxic, harmful. The governments, the community at large decides on what it is, and we all agree within everyone participating in the system to label it what it is. This is going on about the changes. I think WMIS 2018 has been around for long enough. That's all probably many of us know. Looking at it, they have what's called pictograms. And the idea are these graphic images immediately show the user the hazardous product, what type of hazard is present. With a very quick glance, you're able to see that the product is flammable, let's say, or it might be a health hazard. Most pictograms have a distinctive red square set on its points. So a diamond shape with the actual picture in the middle. Inside the border is a symbol that represents the potential hazard. For example, fire, health, corrosive. And together the symbol and the border referred to as a pictogram. And pictograms are assigned to a specific hazard class or category, which we'll get into in a moment. The great setup of this program, though, is the pictograms are very easily comprehended. So even if English isn't your first language, even if you're new to the system, to the working system rather, with very little training, you can take a look at it and say, I recognize this substance has this pictogram. I recognize that special precautions need to be had, and I should probably ask someone how to do it, or I should be wearing something, or I should have had training on it. They're very easily understood. The pictures are, a flame looks a flame, flame over circle is oxidizing. So there's a big old skull and crossbones. Very easily understood, regardless of your comprehension of the languages at hand. Talking about the hazard groups, there's two hazard groups. Physical hazard groups based on the physical or chemical properties of the product, such as flammability, reactivity, or corrosivity to metals. And then what you have the actual health hazard groups, how it affects a human. Eye irritation, respiratory sensitization, asthma, breathing difficulties, whether it causes cancer or not. There are a number of hazard classes, your physical hazards and your health hazards that define what they may be. Looking at labeling, we'll discuss this in a moment, but labeling materials is the way health hazard information is made available to users, and although it is not required by law, it is recommended that all hazardous materials be labeled. Could you go ahead and in the chat function and just provide an answer, please? So is it true or false? Great. Everyone said false. A bit of a trick question. It is required by law. So if it is a WMIS controlled product, you do have to ensure labeling is accomplished. What is the purpose of labeling? Labels tell what precautions to take when using. Labels are required under government regulations. You can relabel at any time when there's a change in substance. It tells you that there is additional information on the SDS. Good, we got a lot of F's again. Yeah, absolutely. So labels tell what precautions to take when using. So it lets us know how we have to deal with the product itself. It tells us that they are required under government regulations. So it's saying, it is something very specific. And lastly, that there is additional information on the SDS. And we'll show you what the SDS and labels look like in a moment. We're going to take a look at the labels. There's two sorts of labels. We're going to start with the supplier. They can look different. Labels are able to, the aesthetic of it can vary. There are some core components that are required though. The language, it must, here in Canada, because we have two official languages, it must be in English and French. We have to know what the product identifier is. So that means the brand name, the chemical name, common name, generic name. We need to know what is in that vessel. Initial supplier identifier, so that's the name, address, and telephone number of either the manufacturer or the Canadian importer. So we need to know who created this product in Canada or who brought this product into Canada. Those are going to be our best sources of action if there's a disaster. And we need to identify that information and have it available, updated, obviously, whenever that changes, on a yearly basis as well. We need to have the pictograms, which we just took a look at. Has to have signal words. Signal words, danger or warning. Danger, rightfully so, is used for high-risk hazards, and warning is for less severe hazards. Needs to have the hazard statements, which are standardized phrases which describe the nature of the hazard posted by the hazardous product. Cautionary statements, they must have standardized phrases that describe measures to be taken to minimize or prevent adverse effects resulting from exposure to a hazardous product. So we need to know what to do. And supplemental label information. It could be more information about actions, hazards not yet included in the global harmonized system. Other things that are relevant. So if it's there, it has to be, or if it's relevant, it has to be on the label itself. This is what a supplier label could look like. Again, the aesthetics of it could be different. It could, have different font, could have, be bigger, be smaller, but identifying what the key components are. So the product identifier, we see that this product K1, we see that it's in French and English, again, for requirements. We see the pictograms relevant to this particular substance. We see our signal word danger. We have a hazard statement that says fatal if swallowed, causes skin irritation. We have our precautionary statements, basically how to deal with it. In this case, wear gloves, wash hands, get a store locked up. It tells you what to do if it gets on your skin. And lastly, at the bottom, we have who the supplier or distributor is. We don't know if it's a supplier or a distributor. It doesn't really matter. Though that is the company, if there is a major issue or a major hazard or there is a train derailment, that's who is going to be contacted for more information. Secondly, we have what's called a workplace label. And a workplace label is slightly different. There is no requirement for how a workplace label must look. The idea is the product is going to be used at the workplace. Where a workplace label is required is when a hazardous product is produced, made at the workplace, and used in that workplace. So if you're making Windex, let's say, or some sort of cleaning chemical, you're actually making it in the facility and you're using it to clean your facility, you could just use a workplace label. A hazardous product that is decanted, transferred, or poured into another container. So if you're taking it from a big, 60-gallon drum and putting it into a smaller handheld vessel, you don't necessarily have to put the supplier label on the small sprayer or whatever it is you're using. You can just put a workplace label. And then when a supplier label has become lost or illegible, there are two situations where a workplace label is not necessary. And that is when the hazardous product is poured into a container and it is going to be used immediately. So if you're decanting it into another vessel, but you're going to use the entirety of the product immediately, there's going to be none left. You don't have to necessarily put a label on it. Second, when you're under the control of the person who decanted it. So if I was the person who decanted it, I'm the only person that's going to use it. I am going to use it up before the end of my shift. I do not necessarily have to put a workplace label on. Is it good practice to? Perhaps. Am I required by under WHMIS legislation? No, not in this case. In this case, where we're looking at it, we see the three components. We see the product name, we see acetone. We have some safe handling precautions. It may include a pictogram or other supplier label information. So it basically tells us how to deal with the product. And then it has to have a reference to the SDS. So essentially, we recognize that this is a WHMIS controlled product. There is SDS sheets. If I come across this product in the workplace, I can go to the SDS sheets to get more information about that particular product. The hazard statement. Each hazard class and category has an assigned hazard statement. Hazard statements are brief. They're generally standardized sentences that tell you more about the exact hazard of the product. The statements are short, but they describe the most significant hazards of the product. Some examples are extremely flammable gas, contains gas under pressure, may explode if heated, fatal if inhaled, cause the eye irritation, or may cause cancer. The wording of the hazard statement helps to describe the degree of the hazard. For example, may cause cancer is more hazardous than suspected of causing cancer. Should be an easy one. What does SDS stand for under Ordinance 2015? Is it safety data sheets, safety directive statements, safety decree sheets, safely dictate sheets? Yeah, great answer, guys. Safety data sheets. So what does SDS stand for? Safety data sheets. It's a document that includes information on the potential hazards, health, fire, reactivity, and environmental, and how they work safely with the chemical product. It's important to understand that SDS sheets are prepared by the supplier or the manufacturer of the material and not the workplace. The workplace is responsible for having the SDS sheets, making sure they're updated, making sure they're available, making sure they're in a easily accessible place. It's of little use if the SDS sheets are locked in a cabinet somewhere and the employees who are actually working on the shift can't actually access it. One of the statements is SDS sheets are an essential starting point for the development of a complete health and safety program. And I can frame that as, from our perspective as a temporary employer of labor, if I'm going to a client and they have an SDS program and they're telling you about it, instantly I'm going to feel at ease. You know, I do understand that this customer understands that they do have requirements. They're working with products that are potentially hazardous, and they have already developed a program to deal with those chemicals. That instantly puts me at ease a little bit. You know, if you were to walk into a client and they have no idea what WMIS is or what SDS sheets are, I would be immediately a little more guarded or a little more concerned about supplying labor in that particular facility. So what are the worker education program for WMIS? There's a few things that it has to have. Labels, SDS sheets, hazard information procedures, handling emergency procedures. The law states that employers educate a worker exposed or likely to be exposed to a controlled product. An exposed worker is any worker who stores, handles, uses, or disposes of a controlled product, or who supervises another worker performing these activities. So you don't necessarily have to be the person controlling the substance. If you're the supervisor for it, you have to have received this education program. One of the questions that's often asked is any follow-up testing required? And the answer is yes, as the employer of record is expected to try and ensure that the worker has understood the training material. So having some sort of test and is able to put into practice what he or she has learned. And we want to be doing this yearly. So you must have some sort of mechanism in place to track the certifications of your employees, whether or not when the last time they have been WMIS trained. What are the employer responsibilities? They don't get off without any responsibilities. They must participate in education and training sessions. They have to follow the safe work procedures established by the employer. They need to work in compliance of the act and regulations. They must wear the PPE. Doesn't really matter what their opinion is. If the customer, if the worksite provider has said that some PPE is required, all workers are required to wear that. And they also have the requirement to report any hazards, machine defects, and any contraventions of the act to the supervisor. Let me switching gears a little bit. We're going to be looking at unsuspecting hazards. This is also the time we're going to take a break. It's 1:50. I'm going to suggest we take a 5-minute break. Get up, stretch. We'll come back at 1:55 my time. And I'll see you guys back here in a minute. 5 minutes, rather.
Sounds good.
Okay, so 155, welcome back, everyone. We're kind of getting through this pretty quickly. Again, with a smaller group, it's a little easier to go through these items. Let me switching gears a little bit. We're going to be starting to look at hazards in the workplace. Understand that hazards can come from a variety of sources. And one of the things that we have to be concerned with the most as an employer of employees. We're going to be looking at a case study. We're going to start this off. It's a little bit of a lengthy read, but it's kind of important to understand how hazards apply in the workplace. So we're going to be looking at this from the perspective of a temporary employment agency. And the background is 3 workers are working on an asbestos abatement project in a single family home. The abatement area is enclosed. In that area, certain asbestos containing materials had been removed, and there was an asbestos dust hazard present. Ministry of Labor inspector attended and conducted an inspection. The inspector found one of the workers exiting the enclosed area wearing street clothing. 2 other workers were found inside the enclosed area not wearing protective clothing. One was performing cleanup, and the other was securing bags filled with asbestos-containing material. The Ministry of Labor in its press release states that there's potential for harm where workers and others are exposed to even small amounts of asbestos. Ultimately, the company pleaded guilty. The company was fined $25,000. Very low fine. I mean, this was 10 years ago, so that is relevant. And lastly, the supervisor was fined $4,000 after pleading guilty to failing to ensure workers use protective clothing and equipment. So if you could share, just let me know what sort of things were wrong with this situation. What would you have done as a temporary employment agency had these 3 workers been your employees? What would you have done? Anyone got any ideas? Just go ahead and say it. No use typing that out.
I mean, it sounds like they, I mean, again, did they even know what they were gonna be doing there? So, site work's always tough, so I
Mhm.
guess if you're sending them for site work, we try to stay away from it, to be honest with you, but I guess it would just be, getting from the customer how they're protecting their own employees and how ours are gonna be protected.
Right,
So
absolutely.
maybe look at their policies on PPE.
Yep, that's a good point. Anyone else want to comment? Okay, so one of the things we discussed earlier was a site inspection. I doubt highly that a site inspection would have occurred, or potentially this agency wasn't as knowledgeable about their health and safety requirements. Asbestos is a designated substance. The reason is asbestos. There's no safe consumption of asbestos. They can't, some substances you can consume them or inhale them or what have you. And there's safe working limits. Asbestos, they don't have any. And the reason being is a little bit of asbestos can have very detrimental effects, especially if you have pre-existing conditions, especially if you, there are a number of things that asbestos really affects. There seems to be some variability from it. Some people are exposed to very little amounts of asbestos and develop problems. Some people have worked with asbestos for a long, long time and had no ill effects. One example that I remember, asbestos has basically been, you haven't, since about the late 70s, you weren't able to sell it as a product, as a new product. And then generally they say around 1985, 1986, it had weaned its way out of the commercial system. But one example I always remember when learning about this was a worker who worked with asbestos all day, sat in a room, cut asbestos, whatever his job was, but just all day was working with it, day in and day out. And that gentleman never developed any problems. His wife, however, developed lung cancer. And the reason being, he wouldn't change his clothes. There was no protective clothing that he wore. He would come home and his wife would wash his clothes or handle his clothes, ultimately washing them. And in doing so, she'd be exposed to asbestos. And the wife never smokes, never had any comorbidities, never had secondary effects, but just by virtue of washing her husband's clothes, and her husband taking it into the home place. She had developed lung cancer. And so it kind of shows you asbestos was one of these miracle products. They put in everything, every sort of construction project, pre mid-70s had asbestos. It failed. The best part of it was it didn't ignite, so it was a very non-flammable substance, very durable. It was put in paint, and we'll get through that. But it was one of those things where we learn more as we progress as a society. We understand that asbestos, well, maybe being an amazing substance for certain properties, it had like such a detrimental health effect that we no longer deal with it. But born on that, there are very specific rules associated with working with asbestos. Here in Ontario, it's spelled out quite heavily, and they talk about it in this case study. There has to be protective clothing. There has to be negative pressure put in so the asbestos isn't being aerated into the air outside of the work environment. Not wearing street clothing, having training, understanding how to deal with these hazards. And to me, it sounds like none of those things happen in terms of supplying the workers to this particular work site. It sounds like this particular agency didn't do their due diligence. They just took the money, and ultimately people got fined for it. So it's one of the things we as a third-party provider need to be aware of. We need to make sure our customers are doing what they say they're doing, and make sure whether are doing work that is with designated substances, that they have the necessary plans and procedures and processes in place to deal with it safely and appropriately. So what are designated substances? Designated substances just is a very, it's a categorization, sorry, defined just in Ontario. Other provinces have similar, but this is a very much an Ontario reference in our legislation. And designated substances defined by our Occupational Health and Safety Act within special legislation. It could be a biological agent, chemical agent, physical agent, or a combination of the above. Now, these substances can be hidden in a workplace. We'll kind of get into where they were, but they do have some very strong requirements in dealing with them. So it doesn't necessarily mean you can't supply to customers that deal with designated substances. Again, you have to ensure as the third-party provider, if you are dealing with a customer like that, that they have the processes in place to ensure the safety of your workers. So what are some designated substances? We've got a list of them. I can never say the first one: acrylon, nitrile, arsenic, asbestos, benzene, ethyl oxide, coke oven emissions, isocyanates, lead, mercury, silica, and vinyl chloride. One of the things that we need to understand is that when there is a designated substance, the supervisor, very clear on this, must complete an assessment of the use. The assessment is to determine if a health hazard exists for workers and whether or not a control program is required. This assessment must include the following: information on the use, handling, storage, and disposal, actual and potential exposure of workers, so how much are they going to be exposed to that, and the methods and procedures to control that substance. You are going to want to make sure the joint health and safety is consulted if you're dealing with any of these items. Taking a look at it, the first one is used primarily as a starting monomer in the manufacturing of synthetic polymers, such as acrylic fabrics found in carpets. Arsenic is a strong poison. It's used wood preservatives, insecticides, and herbicides. It's also used in alloys of copper and lead. Asbestos, we kind of discussed that. It's used in wallboard, asphalt, adhesives, caulking, ceiling, floor tiles, gaskets, drywall compound, plaster, roofing shingles. Again, essentially anything made before the 80s. If you're doing any sort of remediation, any sort of work, even in your personal life, very good chance it has asbestos. You may want to get some of the materials tested before you deal with it. As an employer, you have to do that. If it does have asbestos, you're going to want to probably enlist a professional company who's very accustomed to dealing with that. If you're asked to supply labor to that company, again, you want to make sure you strongly do your due diligence and make sure that they are operating safely. Benzene is used to make other chemicals, which are then used to make plastic, resin, nylon, rubber, lubricants, detergents, drugs, and pesticides. It's also a natural component of crude oil and gasoline. Ethylene oxide is used to manufacture ethylene glycol, surfactants, fumigants, fungicides, and petroleum demulsifiers. Coke oven emissions are the airborne constituents of the byproduct created by the destruction of coal and petroleum, so the burning of coal and petroleum. Emissions can occur from the production of steel, from petroleum products, and from the lining of high-temperature furnaces. Isocyanates are typically found in spray foam insulation, sealants, finishes, paints, and auto body materials. Lead, we typically find that in old paint, old mortar, old water pipes, lead sheeting, and in contaminated soil. Mercury, we typically find in fluorescent lights, switches, pressure gauges, electrodes, and contaminated soil. Silica is generally found in bricks and blocks, granite, abrasives, concrete, sandstone, cement, and mortar. It's usually not a problem until you're aerating it, until you're cutting into it. You're creating a dust that stays suspended in the air. That's when it typically becomes a problem. And then lastly, vinyl chloride is used to manufacture PVC, which is used in furniture, upholstery, and many plastic products, including plastic pipes, wire, and wire coating. So quite the gambit. A lot of industries will be using these sort of designated substances. Super important point if you're doing your site inspection, ask if they are dealing with designated substances, especially if you're operating in Ontario. You will need to have your supervisor assessment and plan to deal with it. Maybe taking a look at other hazards. We're going to take a look at a number of them. And these can come up in any workplace. They can come up in your home. I'll give you some examples of just what you can expect from it. First one is confined spaces. Confined spaces they're typically areas that are not generally fit for human occupancy. They're not made for a human to be in there for any length of time. They can include things like silos, vats, hoppers, vaults, tanks, sewers, pipes, access shafts, truck or rail tank cars, aircraft wings, boilers, manholes, manure pits, and storage bins. Ditches and trenches can also be listed as a confined space, depending on whether the egress, whether you're able to get in or out, is limited. Important thing about confined space, especially in Ontario, if a customer asks you to deal, they want a supply of labor to confined space, there are very specific rules and legislation processes regarding dealing with the confined space. You have to have a means of getting the person out. So if they're succumbed by whatever the chemical in the air is in the confined space, you have to have a plan to get them out. You have to have the equipment to get them out. You have to have constant monitoring of the air. You have to have a certain number of people depending on the size of the workplace. So it's very, very specific. So be very cautious if a customer comes to you and says they need laborers for confined space. I'm not saying don't do it. What I'm saying is make sure you're asking more questions and making sure you're comfortable with that company as a whole in how they deal with this. Indoor air quality. We all lived through COVID. We're very sensitive to this, presumably, in terms of it as an issue. The biggest issues with air quality are generally associated with maintaining heating and ventilation systems, contamination by construction materials, such as glues, fiberglass, particle boards, paints, chemicals, increase in number of building occupants and time spent indoors. They can be caused from a number of things: inadequate temperature, poor humidity or too high humidity, lighting, excessive noise. And the contaminants themselves, it can be chemical, it could be dust, could be molds, fungi, bacteria, gases, vapors, odors. It's insufficient outdoor air intake. So I think we all remember, we're still dealing with it, the remnants of it, having HEPA air purifiers in the workplace. Some of your workplaces may require it, depending on what it may be. If you're in the medical facility or medical field, that was definitely something that's still to this day. A lot of times they have these big air quality machines. So it is truly something that we're probably all sensitive to, probably all, have seen it firsthand. But it's something that can be deeply impactful for employees, especially if you're there for the entirety of the day. These things are ingested, they're breathed in, so they're getting into your body very easily rather. Some of them, do have to be absorbed into the skin, but usually it's more of the inhalation method. Lasers can be a problem depending on the workplace. So we're starting to use not starting, but we use lasers for any sorts of things. We use them in simple things such as retail, just simply scanning. We use them in manufacturing, medical procedures. And some of the precautions or the effects rather of it, you can have eye burns, you can have skin burns. Some of the non-beam hazards are when the laser equipment is actually burning something, so it can emit the gas if it's burning something that even human skin, or is burning, some sort of product. If it's cutting, you're fumigating, you're making smoke of the actual product itself. Fourth example we have is scents and temperatures. So if you work in a workplace, scents and temperatures are probably something that has come across your plate, whether it's someone that has a particular scent, whether it's, they're wearing cologne or perfume or some other health product, perhaps whatever it is they are wearing, maybe they have poor hygiene, which is sometimes an issue that you have to deal with, especially as you're dealing with third-party labor. And you have a lot of people. It is something that does occur. Some people are very acutely affected by scents, so they can have actual physical effects from scents. The other one, again, for workplaces inside, if it's an office, temperature is one of the most, I believe I've read it's the most complained about factor in office environments. Some people saying it's too hot, some people saying it's too cold. Those are more comfort factors. Where it becomes really more important, I think, is where you have the extremes of you have like very cold in terms of working in a freezer, working outside, or very hot environments where you're working outside in the summer. You have the sun and the other factors associated with it. So scents and temperature are can be very impactful. They seem very minuscule sometimes when you think about it. I don't like that smell, but for some people, we do have to recognize from a health and safety perspective that they may be impacted more so than the rest of the population. Number 5, we have ventilation. We'll kind of discuss that with the air purifiers, but it's the mechanical system in a building that brings in fresh air and removes the contaminated outdoor air. That can be impactful in all workplaces, so not necessarily just manufacturing, it can be with offices. And generally, poor ventilation leads to the issues in number 2, indoor air quality, which we discussed earlier. You can have mold, you can have bacteria and so forth if you don't have proper ventilation and filtration. Weather, we live in Canada. We know about the dangers of weather. We have lightning, we have snow, we have sleet, we have, all those things can happen in one day here. We really have to be mindful of that for our employees, especially if they are working outside. We have to recognize that we're ensuring that our employees are safe regarding where they are working and the weather itself. Then lastly, we'll get into this a little bit further, but working alone. Working alone is something that is not inherently dangerous, but it can be depending on the situation. And what I mean by that, there are certain factors associated with working alone that enhance the hazard of that event. So it could be things of dealing with the public, dealing with high value items, so having money or having products that are very expensive associated with it, dealing in a high pressure environment. All those sort of things can intensify the hazard of working alone. Ontario has working alone legislation. They refer to it. Other provinces do, or it falls within the general duty clause of the province, and they all kind of share the same sort of thing. And we'll get into that a little bit more. Perfect example of working alone, where it used to be much more of a hazard. I think it has lessened a little bit, is if you think of a gas attendant, so someone working at a gas station. After 10 o'clock, let's say it's dark, you're dealing with the public, you're dealing with money, you're dealing with high value of people filling up the car, and then you have, the confectionery items behind the counter. very high propensity for violence. And what you saw as an industry, and some of it because of legislation, some of it just because they recognized they had to protect their workers, is they implemented controls. So potentially they limit how many people are allowed in the store, if any. They have timed locks. They have items, behind locked areas. They have prepay only. So those are some of the controls you can put into place when working alone. The other one, contacting them, having some sort of, like, the person has to contact you every 2 hours, let's say. Some sort of touch system, verbal touch system, where you're ensuring that they're safe. We'll get into workplace harassment, and it's newer legislation. They have refined it a few times over the years just to ensure that it's incorporating everything necessary. This is an Ontario definition where it says the workplace harassment means engaging in a course of vexatious comment or conduct against a worker in a workplace that is known or reasonably known to be unwelcome, or workplace harassment. It's our role to ensure workers are safe, and we discussed that under the general duty clause. I think it was about 15 years ago, maybe more. Bill 168 came out, where there was an incident between a doctor and a nurse where they had an intimate relationship, and ultimately the doctor ended up killing the nurse. There was warning signs, and it born this legislation in Ontario, especially for workplace harassment and violence. And they kind of intermingle. We talk about harassment and violence, but they do typically, most of our policies are probably violence and harassment. And the idea is we have to include measures and procedures for controlling risks. We talked about the hazards. The flip side of that is controlling the risks. And we need to ensure there's immediate assistance when workplace hazard violence occurs, and that there is a reporting mechanism in place. Later on, it was refined to Bill 132, which includes sexual violence and harassment. So they widened the net here. They made sure that it included sexual harassment, which we'll get into in a second, but it included those things where it was important to make sure that the workers' working environments were safe. Now, what is workplace harassment? Often a misnomer for some people. They don't quite understand what harassment is. I'll get into what it means and what it doesn't mean right now. But harassment can involve unwelcome words or actions. It doesn't necessarily have to be actions. It could be either or a combination of both, that are known or should be known to be offensive, embarrassing, humiliating, demeaning to a worker or group of workers in a workplace. It can include behavior that intimidates, isolates, or even discriminates against the target individual. And it's kind of widespread what they include. It could be making remarks, jokes, innuendos. Could be displaying or circulating offensive pictures or materials in print or electronic form. Could be bullying. Could be repeated offensive or intimidating phone calls or emails. Quasi-bullying. Or ultimately it could be workplace sexual harassment. So any of those things are relevant. And harassment doesn't necessarily mean, it's more related to the intake of the person. So 3 people can hear a joke, 2 people may think it's the funniest joke in the world. One person may be deeply offended. That would be deemed as workplace harassment. It doesn't mean just because 2 people found the joke funny, it's how the person who's making the complaint received that sort of joke. So what isn't workplace harassment? Workplace harassment isn't a reasonable action taken by an employer relating to the management and direction of workers in the workplace. So what does this mean? Things that are part of a regular manager's job. So that would include supervisory functions, normal work functions for a supervisor, including changes in work, assignments, scheduling, job assignments, and evaluation, workplace inspections, implementation of health and safety measures, and disciplinary action. So when this first came out, when it was put into legislation, there was a lot of complaints raised with the Ministry of Labor that when a supervisor disciplined a worker, they said it was workplace harassment. In most cases, that is almost never the case. The supervisor is allowed to discipline a worker. There's obviously gradations to that if it gets past what is quote unquote a normal disciplinary action. They may have a case, but in general, they do not. Workplace sexual harassment, similar sort of definition, but it's engaging in a course of vexation, comment, or conduct against a worker in the workplace because of sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, where the course of comment or conduct is known or ought reasonably known to be unwelcome, or making a sexual solicitation or advance, where the person making the advance is in a position to confer, grant, or deny benefit or advancement to the worker. So that's kind of talking about the power dynamics. So if you have a supervisor and a junior staff member, and they're asking for favors related to sexual conduct, that is 100% sexual harassment. So what does harassment include? Workplace sexual harassment. Again, it's dependent on the reception of the person, but in general, asking questions, talking or writing about sexual activities, rough or vulgar humor, any sort of language related to sexuality, sexual orientation, or gender, displaying or circulating pornography, sexual images, or offensive sexual jokes in print or electronic form, leering or inappropriate staring, invading personal space, unnecessary physical contact, inappropriate touching, demanding hugs, dates, or sexual favors, making gender-related comments about someone's physical characteristics, mannerisms, or conformity to sex role stereotypes, verbally abusing, threatening, or taunting someone based on gender or sexual orientation, or threatening to penalize or otherwise punish a worker if they refuse a sexual advance. Important thing to note, though, workplace sexual harassment, very cautious where it breaches the criminal code. So if there was very clear harassment that involved more than just words, let's say, you may, as the employer, want to engage with the local police on the matter. It's again, it can breach the criminal code, and if that's the case, you definitely want the police involved in that sort of case. Workplace violence, sometimes misunderstood. The definition is the exercise of physical force by a person against a worker that causes or could cause physical injury. Second one, the attempt to exercise physical force that could cause physical injury. Lastly, a statement of behavior that is reasonable for a worker to interpret as a threat to exercise physical force against a worker in a workplace. So you don't necessarily have to hit a person. You don't have to touch a person. You don't have to throw a shoe or hammer or bottle or whatever it may be. The threat can be conveyed as workplace violence. We have to understand if workplace violence happens in the workplace, we do have to deal with it. We can't just shoo it off as just two people being themselves. What can this include? Verbally threatening to attack a worker. So again, it doesn't necessarily have to be the physicality of it. Leaving threatening notes or sending threatening emails to a workplace. Shaking a fist in a worker's face, wielding a weapon at work, hitting or trying to hit a worker, throwing an object, sexual violence against a worker, kicking an object the worker is standing on, such as a ladder, or trying to run down a worker, using a vehicle or equipment such as a forklift, or threatening to fight someone in the parking lot after work. All those things can be viewed as, or should be viewed as, workplace violence. And there are very specific steps you want to investigate, you want to deal with them appropriately, and make sure you do have a process in place. Doesn't matter that we're third-party providers. If it happens at the client, you still want to have a process in place. Changing gears a little bit, we're going to be looking at sound levels. So hazardous sound levels. There is something called the occupational exposure limit. It's the maximum criterion level that in Ontario is 85 decibels for an 8-hour shift. What that means is for an 8-hour shift, you can be exposed to 85 decibels as the safe limit for noise. Anything above that level, you're going to have either brakes or some sort of ear protection in place, whether it's the muff style like in the picture or the in the ear. What you want to do is lessen that decibel rating. You want to bring it under the 8-hour shift. And so with hazardous sound levels, generally, if you're concerned about this, you're going to want to bring in some sort of, generally they call them occupational hygienists. They'd probably be the company that deals with it or the professionals that deal with it. You want to make sure that the steady noise level is permitted for the full 8-hour work shift. So again, you're below that 85 decibels. And the exchange rate, the amount by which the permitted sound level may increase if the exposure time is halved. What that means is if you are exposed to 90 decibels, they have specific sort of charts where you can be exposed for X number of minutes. Those are the things you need to be concerned with. So again, making sure that the ultimate level of sound is sufficient and then making sure the time exposed to that sound is sufficient to the legislation. Each jurisdiction has some minor variances. 85 is generally deemed to be the level where you start to have problems. Going to switch gears to first aid requirements. First aid requirements, um, if any of you deal with multi-provincial, like if your company has offices in multiple provinces, it's kind of a mess because each province has their own legislation. There is move to collectively have just one first aid requirement across Canada, moving very slowly, very, very slowly. In fact, these particular references I make are going to be Ontario based, and it's based on Regulation 1101. And it basically states all the rules associated with first aid and first aid stations. It looks at the equipment and services needed. They have to be inspected. Stations need to be easily accessible and near a worker who has a valid first aid certificate. Notice board displaying first aid poster, first aid certificate, the valid first aid certificates of qualified trained people on duty, and kit inspection card available, and detailed records of all incidents and first aid treatment. Two factors to this: you want to take a look at your own offices, make sure you have a first aid trained person. It's tough, especially if you have a smaller office or you have one person trained and they're not necessarily in the office. Secondary to that, you want to make sure that your clients are maintaining their first aid requirements. So when you're doing your risk inspection, you may want to be asking those questions. What's your first aid program? Who are your first aid people? Where's your first aid station? Those are great questions to ask when you are doing a site inspection. What is the training? Again, this reference is just for Ontario, but for workplaces with 6 or more workers on any shift, a standard first aid certificate is required. The first aid stations need to be under the control of the first aid person. The general, standard practice is it should be within a 2-minute walk. So you want to have first aid stations within a 2-minute walk of where the first aid person is generally situated. And CPR is a mandatory module as part of this program. Changing gears again, we're going to look at OSA and critical injury. Critical injury is an Ontario term, but most provinces have a very similar sort of idea surrounding the nature of this. So critical injury is anything that places a life in jeopardy. Anything that produces unconsciousness, anything that results in substantial loss of blood. They do not define it. You have to be confident in your decision what's a substantial loss of blood. Involves the fracture of a leg or arm, but not a finger or toe. Involves the amputation of a leg, arm, hand, or foot, but not a finger or toe. Consists of burn to a major portion of the body, or causes the loss of sight in one eye. So when do you report a critical injury? Critical injury occurs when a critical injury occurs. The employer must notify a Ministry of Labor inspector immediately by telephone. You must contact a member of the Joint Health and Safety Committee or the rep. And together, those two parties must conduct a thorough investigation. Lastly, a written report must be prepared and forwarded to the Ministry of Labor within 48 hours. So if a critical injury occurs, you have to notify the ministry right away. Once you make the decision, okay, well, it falls within the confines of these rules. You have to notify the ministry, so you call into their hotline. You'll provide basic information, what your client name is, presumably. Make sure you understand who's reporting, whether it's the client or yourself. You don't want to double report. Not that it really matters, but it's good to have that communication with your client if this does occur. You will need to conduct an investigation. So if one of these things happen, it's probably going to involve WSIB anyways. And then understand within 48 hours, you have to submit a written report to the Ministry of Labor. So this is a case study. I'm going to read it. It's a bit longer, and a couple of the questions stem from this. So we're going to go through this. A new client places an order for general labor. It is the final assembly line that wraps and boxes cans of cat food. They will then lift the newly packaged box and put it on the skid. Another worker will use a work forklift to pick up the skid when it is full. The customer tells you that they run a very safe operation and have won an award. Training will be provided around their safety procedure. Safety boots are required. Gloves will be provided. After the second week, the employee placed at the assignment tells you they will not return. You ask them the reason, and they say the equipment that is used to put plastic wrap on the case, the food is blocked, and they want you to push the product through with your hand using more force. They also asked, in the absence of the forklift driver, you operate the forklift and move the skids to a designated area. The person refused, but the supervisor said everybody does it. And lastly, they burn themselves while packaging, and your supervisor told you to be more careful. You do not feel safe, and the supervisor intimidates you. So based on this scenario, true or false? Can the customer or yourself discipline the employer for refusing to work? You just record your answer in the chat and we'll discuss. Great answers. Yeah, false. We already discussed about the right to refuse work at the beginning of the call today. Absolutely, you cannot discipline the person for this. They're exercising their fundamental right. What is the right to refuse work? An employee can refuse work at any time for the following reasons. The physical condition of the workplace or workstation is likely to endanger your employee or a coworker. Any machine or equipment or tool that the worker is using, the physical condition of the workplace is likely to endanger your employee or another worker. Lastly, if workplace violence is present. So how can you ensure and support your workers when they uncover an unsafe work environment? You do want to maintain communication. You want to make sure that your employee has had the mandatory training, again, notifying them of their basic rights. And you want to make sure that the client is doing the same. True or false? The employee will not be paid while refusing to work. Is that true or false? So the employee will not be paid while refusing work. How does that work? One of those trick questions. Yep. Yep, Rudolph, it is a trick question. So overwhelmingly, the answer seems to be F, false. An employee will be paid during the first stage of work refusal. We'll kind of discuss what this means. Again, very Ontario-centric sort of process. Each province does have work refusal processes. This is Ontario specifically. Stage one. So stage one is the worker comes to the supervisor and says, you know what, I don't like this ladder, I don't like this machine, I don't like this area I'm in, it's icy, I'm gonna slip and fall. Whatever it may be, they identify to management, to the supervisor, that the work area is unsatisfactory, it's unsafe, and they are refusing work. So what happens? The work must stop immediately. Supervisor will need to investigate the issue. So they're actually going to have to listen to the worker. Doesn't matter that they're a temporary employee. That means nothing. Because again, everyone is a worker under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The worker needs to remain close to site. So you can't just send them home while you're doing the investigation. That's you will be punished by the Ministry of Labor if you do that. And if there is resolution, it has to be reported to the Joint Health and Safety Department. So what happens if we can't reach an amendment? So what the supervisor goes, examines the area, thinks the work is safe, and discounts what the original employee was saying. If the worker still has reasonable grounds to believe that the site of situation is still unsafe, we move to stage two. So the worker can continue to say the work is unsafe. I disagree with you, Mr. Supervisor or Mrs. Supervisor. It is unsafe. I will fail to continue. And there has to be communication back and forth at this stage. You want to resolve this always before you reach the next stage. Stage three is where you do not want to be, because at stage three, ultimately, you are unable to come to a conclusion. A conclusion doesn't necessarily mean, you know, if the worker says, I don't believe this machine is safe, I don't want to work on it. A conclusion could just be moving the worker to a new work location. Could mean a new, let's say if the ladder was broken, could mean putting a new ladder in place, taking the old one out of commission. It could mean moving to an entire different part of the industry, the company. For our purposes, it could mean moving that person to a new client. So if they didn't like the client at all, felt it was unsafe, as the employer of records, you're able to move them to a new client. Stage 3 is where you don't want to get to. You don't want to get to the situation where the worker's saying it's unsafe, supervisor is saying it's safe, and you're basically at loggerheads. At that stage, you got to contact the Ministry of Labor. So the Ministry of Labor, you have to call them, you have to tell them what's going on. The inspector may or may not come to the workplace. If the inspector comes to the workplace, they've driven all the way over there, they're going to look around. So they will not just look at the machine in question. They will walk around and check the fire equipment, you have a WMIS program in place. Anytime you invite an inspector into your workplace, whether invited or they just walk in, they will be looking for many different things. You don't want to get there. So you want to get to a resolution before that. What will happen is the inspector will levy a decision. The work is either safe and the worker has to return to that particular area, or they will issue a stop work order and you will have to fix the machine, or you'll have to take that ladder out of repair and put a new one in. Whatever it may be to remedy the situation, you will have to do. That can get very costly if you're shutting down an entire line at a client because of this work refusal, because the client failed to maintain their equipment. That can get incredibly costly. So we do not want to get to stage 3. So the other thing is you want to be documenting all these processes that you're doing. You do want to have the process in place before this ever happens. Make sure your people are trained. If there is a work refusal, you can't just ignore it. You can't just be like, oh, it's just Sharon being Sharon. She's just Tim being Tim. You know what I mean? It's not those sort of things. You have to have a process in place. You have to treat it seriously, document it, and make sure that you're able to defend your position. Moving on to the last part, we're going to take a look at Provincial Compensation Acts. So WCB, WSIB, Workplace, WorkSafe, whatever it may be in the province you are in. Here in Ontario, where I'm situated, we call it WSIB. I'll probably just refer to it as WCB though, in case there are other people. What is provincial compensation? Employers, managers, supervisors, workers in the government all have responsibilities when it comes to workplace health and safety. We discussed at the beginning of the call today. It remains in force here. It applies to workers' compensation as well. Workers still have the same basic rights. What it deals with is not the preventative part of it. It is more what happens when there is an actual injury. How do we deal with it? What do we need to do? What are our requirements? So what is the purpose of the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act? What it is, if you have zero knowledge about it, it is an insurance plan. It is an insurance plan between an employer and employee. It provides compensation to an employee who is injured or disabled due to a workplace injury. It ensures a successful return to work of employees following work-related injuries, promotes health and safety in the workplace and reduces injury and disease, and facilitates the return of work and recovery of workers. What this means, it's a fairly long-standing piece of legislation, very beginning of the 1900s, I believe, 1904, 1908, something like that. So it's long-standing, but not that long-standing. And what it was an understanding that employees may get hurt in the workplace and that these employees need protection. So that if you are injured in the workplace, you're not losing your livelihood, you're not losing your house, the employer can't fire you. It's protection for the employee in terms of they get compensation and they get treatment and they get a safe return to work when necessary. From the employer perspective, it mitigates when there is a major injury. There is insurance provided. You're not having to pay money all up front. You're not getting sued by the employee if they go through the workers' compensation system. It's also what's called a no-fault system. So it doesn't really matter if the worker was at fault or the employer was at fault, or it doesn't look into that. There's no examination and fault into it. The only exception would be if an employee was doing what's generally called horseplay. So if they were I don't know, driving on top of the forklift, like riding it, doing something so egregious that it was, born only of the employee. It was their actions alone that caused the injury, nothing that the employer could have done. It is funded 100% by employers. A common misconception is that it's part of the general government coffers. It is not. If you're an employer in any province, you have to report your earnings, and then you pay a premium associated with those earnings, whatever it may be. Every province is slightly different, but 100% of the fund is by employers. Lastly, there are very impactful financial and legal implications. The Workers' Compensation Board can fine you if you're not performing your requirements, such as not returning a worker after they've been injured. You can receive, in Ontario, it's up to a year's fine, as well as loss of earnings for the employee. Legal implications, so they can implement legal remedies to ensure that you are performing what you need to do. It is very impactful for an employer. What happens? The Act ensures that employees receive support and healthcare by a number of ways. Returning to work in their pre-injury position or other suitable work. The work in the pre-injury role may no longer be available or the term has ended. One of the things that we can do as a third-party supplier is perhaps you're injured at one customer, and that's a high work environment. You may have another customer that has very low physical requirements. As the employer of record, we do have the ability to move the employee to that other customer as long as it's suitable. Like as long as it's in the same city, it's within their ability and so forth. A lot of factors to it, but it is an ability. It's one of the advantages we have as a third-party provider. The Act provides assistance in finding alternate employment. So that's kind of what I was discussing. More so to that, if an employee is injured and they cannot return to employment with you, what the board will do is provide retraining. And the retraining is very expensive, very time consuming. It could take a couple of years. Could include things like actual retraining, so going to school again. More simpler things. It could be, taking a course, let's say, or taking a 6-week resume writing sort of course, assistance in job hunting, all sorts of things that can happen. It's generally, again, very costly to be involved. You can hopefully resolve the issue before it gets to that. And lastly, it enables compensation to be paid to the worker when a worker loses earnings or becomes disabled, or the survivors if there is a fatal injury. Record keeping is critical. I always remember a teacher I had at the very beginning discussing this, said that if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And I didn't quite understand what he meant back then. After many, many years later, I do understand that. You want to document every single thing that happened. So if the worker calls you and tells you they're injured, hopefully you have some sort of system in your workplace to record that information. That's when it starts. You want to be recording everything that happens. Many times you don't know what is important until it is important. And that's where documentation comes into place. The government, the Workers' Compensation Board, doesn't care if you had the conversation. If you can't prove that it happened, they will always decide in favor of the employee. It happens 100% of the time. Doesn't matter if you swear on a stack of Bibles, unless it's written, unless it's documented appropriately, they will side on the favor of the employee. So what sort of things do you want to be recording? Date and time of the occurrence, witnesses, what happened, any sort of statements, any sort of details what happened. If there's witness statements, good idea to get that information. It's absolutely crucial to get that information though, and make sure it's documented, making sure you have a means of keeping all that information that's easily retrievable in case you need to deal with it. You want to make sure you're capturing all these details. We have multiple choice again. When there is a critical injury in the workplace, the manager is required to report the injury within 24 to 36 hours of the injury taking place to the safety group, 3 days to workers' compensation, immediately to the Ministry of Labor, 2 days with a written report to the Ministry of Labor, all of the above, BCD only. So the important points to remember, there is a critical injury in the workplace. When do we have to report it? We got a couple different answers. The best answer here is F. So remember, this is a critical injury. So we have to report to the Workers' Compensation Board within 3 days. We have to report it immediately to the Ministry of Labor. So that's that phone call we have to make to the Ministry of Labor. And then we have to provide a written report within 2 days. So if an employer is absent from work or requires health care as a result of a workplace accident, incident must be reported to the Workers' Compensation Board within 3 calendar days if these 3 conditions: your worker loses time from work, they earn less than a regular day's pay, or they go to healthcare. One of the things I try to instill upon our staff when they first start with this, especially if they've never had experience with this, you only have to remember 2 things: if they miss time or money, and if they see a medical provider. Either of those 2 conditions happen, got to report it to the Workers' Compensation Board. In Ontario, you can wait on reporting for 7 days if the worker is doing modified work. So they're still returning to work, they're doing something modified. If they're able within 7 days to return to regular duties, you don't have to report it. You may want to record the information, as I stated earlier, but you don't necessarily, within those confines, have to report it to Workers' Compensation Board. Return to work and duty to modify work. When considering modified work, there's certain parameters you want to make sure it is achievable, safe, constructive, and productive. What does this mean? Achievable work is work that is able to be done by the worker. You got to take a look at their injury. You got to make sure that you're taking in their limitations. If they are unable to actually do the work because of one of those 2 things, that return to work or duty to modify the work is not suitable. They're set up to fail, essentially. Has to be safe. So we want to continue to keep all the workers safe. So this is a key component when workers are returning or you are modifying work for them. You don't want them getting injured, re-injured. You don't want them doing something where they injure a different part of their body. If it's overusing the other side. So if it's their left shoulder, you don't want them overusing the right shoulder where they develop a right shoulder injury. You want to make sure it's constructive. So the question is, are you able to increase the skill level of the worker? You want to make sure that it is doing things that are improving the worker themselves. And lastly, productive. You want to make sure it's increasing the overall success of the organization. You can't have them sit in the lunchroom and watch Netflix all day. If the employee makes a complaint to the Workers' Compensation Board about the modified work, and they say, you know what, I'm just told to sit in the lunchroom and watch Netflix, you might be held in contempt of your return to work duties. The board may look at it and say, you know what, Mr. Employer, Mrs. Employer, you're not satisfying the requirements because it doesn't meet these achievable, safe, constructive, and productive requirements. We're going to take a look at, we're going to move on. Is anyone in Alberta? Is anyone based out of Alberta? Hearing nothing. I think we'll move on. Alberta's slightly different. I don't think we have to go through it. It's not on the actual test, the CPC test, the Alberta thing. It's just more, we used to get a lot of Albertans taking the course. So we can't ignore the next 3 slides. So the last 2 slides are some links for you. They take a look at this page is provincial compensation boards in Canada. Sometimes even if let's say you're based in Ontario, some of the other boards have great websites, especially if you're looking for information on specific jobs. So if maybe you're not familiar with, I don't know, whatever job, BC is a great example of where they have really good media, really good like documentation associated with different jobs and doing things safely and so forth. So it may not necessarily be completely relevant to you, but they have some generalized, how to operate X, Y, and Z safely, how to, how to deal with working at heights appropriately, some generalized knowledge. It's a good idea to look through them, especially if you're based in the province. Go check out your provincial workers' compensation board. Couple resources: Canadian Center for Occupational Safety and Health, great asset. It's I believe it's federally funded, has great information on working safely. So they have some basic information like how to shovel safely. So some things where you may want to put in your job descriptions if you're going through them. Probably most of us are using some sort of AI for job descriptions now. If you are looking for the safety functions of it, CCOHS is a great resource though. Free for, I think most of it's free, but I used to use that, or I do use that all the time actually, when you're trying to find out very specific information. It's a good resource because it's government based, so you can refer to it. It's not just you're not just using Grok or ChatGPT for these things. Good thing to reference back to. Ministry of Labor within your jurisdiction. In Ontario, it's the labor.gov.on. That's our Ministry of Labor. Some of the other provinces are slightly different. A good resource for health and safety aspects of it. They do have what's the word for it? Interpretations of some of the legislation to look through. One that's not on here that should be, to be honest, is Canley. So if you're responsible for dealing with workers' compensation and you want to look up case law, you want to look up maybe most of you are probably HR professionals in some capacity. Great resource if you're looking up legislation, if you want to look up regulations for any province, everything's there. It's updated. If the government changes the law, usually within 48 hours, the county's updated as well. Great resource. I recommend it strongly if you're involved in that sort of field. And then lastly, definitely recommend if you have any industry specific questions, get a hold of ACSESS. ACSESS has far-reaching effects. They've been doing this for a long time. You could just call the office if you're concerned about any sort of legislation or interpretation of the legislation. It's a very good resource for us to have part of us. So that's the extent of it. We kind of got through it pretty quickly. So within 2 hours. Good luck on your tests. And again, if you have any questions, reach out to Jennifer or ACSESS. They'll be able to help you out.
Do you know, sorry, David, just a quick question. Do we just schedule our own exam time or how do you,
Yeah,
do we do
talk to
that through
Jennifer about
Jennifer?
that. Yeah,
Okay.
I have no affiliation with that part of it. Jennifer will help you out though.
All right. And then one more thing, we're running into some, because we deal with a lot of food companies now. I know it's not legislative, but HACCP training. We give them a general GMP,
Yep.
just a sheet basically acknowledging no jewelry, perfumes, whatnot. Does anyone know of any HACCP training that we could do?
Well, I think not to get too deep into it, but that training is going to be very specific to the client themselves.
Yes.
So you may have some generalized sort of industry best practices,
Yeah.
but you're probably going to want to ask the specific client what it
Yeah.
is in their sake, because it may just be like the difference between blue shirts are doing one thing and the yellow shirts are doing another thing, or the specifics of their machines. So it's usually better to deal client by client basis for that. You can provide like general basic information, but
Mm-hmm.
you may want
Okay.
to have something where the associates sign off on, what ABC Manufacturing, this is their HACCP.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was just looking for even like a general overhaul thing like the GMP that we do, but okay.
Yeah, I think there's resources out there. I mean, check CCOHS.
Yeah.
They're actually pretty good. BCOHS, I believe, similar sort of thing. You get pretty good basic information. You don't
Okay.
need to pay for it. Like that thing is going to be so generalized. They're all,
Yeah, and that's what I'm looking for. Yeah, something like that.
yeah. Check those out.
Yeah, cool. All right.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Well,
Thanks,
thank you
Dave.
very much.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye
Thanks,
now.
everyone.